Imagine this: a thin bundle of fibers, no thicker than a shoelace, quietly running from your brain down through your chest and into your gut. For decades, scientists thought of it as just a messenger for digestion and heart rate. But today, research reveals something extraordinary. This nerve, the vagus nerve, may hold the key to helping the brain rewire itself after a stroke. Now, why does this matter? Because stroke is not just an event. It is a sudden rewiring of identity. One moment, you can speak, move, or recall a loved one's face with ease. The next, parts of that ability are stolen. And while traditional rehabilitation helps, many people are left with lingering deficits. But here's the surprising fact. Studies now show that stimulating the vagus nerve can accelerate recovery, literally teaching the brain how to rebuild itself. The stakes are enormous. Stroke is one of the leading causes of long-term disability worldwide. Yet, the brain is not fixed. It is plastic, adaptable, capable of rewiring, if given the right cues. And this is where vagus nerve stimulation, or VNS, enters the story. Here's what the research shows. Pairing brief bursts of vagus nerve stimulation with physical therapy exercises can double or even triple the amount of recovery and motor function compared to therapy alone. In 2021, a landmark clinical trial published in The Lancet demonstrated this effect in stroke survivors, sparking a wave of excitement in neuroscience and rehabilitation medicine. But the question is, why does this work? How can a nerve in your neck influence the rewiring of circuits in your brain? And, more importantly, what practical lessons can you take from this science, whether you are recovering from a stroke yourself, supporting a loved one, or simply looking to understand how to keep your brain more resilient with age? In today's talk, we are going to break this down into 6 powerful insights. You will learn how the vagus nerve acts as the body's reset button for stress and neuroplasticity, why pairing stimulation with action creates faster recovery, the exact brain chemicals released during VNS, and how they reshape circuits, the difference between invasive and non-invasive stimulation methods, how lifestyle practices like breathing and cold exposure mimic some of these effects, and finally, how you can apply this science-driven framework to boost resilience and protect your brain, even if you've never had a stroke. So stay with me, because by the end of this you'll understand not only how VNS rewires the brain, but also what simple, research-backed tools you can start using today to support neuroplasticity, recovery, and lifelong brain health. Let me start with a question. If you wanted to rebuild a damaged road, what's the first step? You don't just pour concrete randomly. First, you clear debris, redirect traffic, and prepare the surface so that new pavement can actually stick. The brain works the same way after a stroke. And the vagus nerve, as surprising as it sounds, is one of the main tools that helps prepare the brain for new wiring. Here's what the research shows. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, running from the brainstem down through the heart, lungs, and gut. It's the main pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest counterpart to the stress-driven fight or flight. But in the last 2 decades, scientists uncovered something profound. Activating this nerve doesn't just slow your heart rate or calm digestion. It directly influences the brain's ability to change, what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. A 2016 review in Frontiers in Neuroscience outlined how vagus nerve stimulation sends signals up into the nucleus tractus solitarius, a brainstem hub, which then relays signals to regions like the locus coeruleus and basal forebrain. Why does that matter? Because these regions release neuromodulators, chemicals that act like a switch, telling neurons, pay attention, strengthen this connection. Without these signals, new learning and recovery are weak. With them, the brain becomes primed to rewire. Think of it like soil and seeds. Physical therapy after a stroke is the planting of seeds, practicing a hand movement, trying to form words again. But if the soil is dry and depleted, very little will grow. Vagus nerve stimulation waters the soil with acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Suddenly, the seeds have a much higher chance of taking root. Here's a striking example. In animal studies, when rats were given vagus nerve stimulation paired with motor training, their recovery of limb function improved dramatically compared to training alone. Later, clinical trials in humans confirmed this. Stroke survivors receiving VNS alongside rehab achieved significantly greater gains than those doing the same rehab without stimulation. Now, let's step back. Why does this matter to you, whether or not you've had a stroke? Because the principle here applies to any kind of learning or recovery. The vagus nerve essentially acts as a neuroplasticity switch, signaling the brain to open the gates for change. If the switch is off, progress is slow. If the switch is on, the same efforts yield much larger results. So, what does this mean in practical terms? First, it means timing matters. If you're working on recovery after a stroke, pairing therapy with vagus stimulation, even simple non-invasive forms like paced breathing, can boost plasticity. Imagine sitting down to practice hand exercises or speech drills. Spending just 2 minutes beforehand doing slow exhalation breathing, which engages the vagus nerve, can prime your brain to absorb the training more effectively. Second, it highlights the importance of state. When we're stressed, our sympathetic nervous system dominates. That stress state actually shuts down plasticity. The brain focuses on survival, not learning. But when the vagus nerve is engaged, stress lowers and the brain enters a fertile state for growth. Let me ask you, have you ever tried to learn something new while feeling anxious or rushed? It barely sticks. But when you're calm, present, and focused, learning feels smoother. That's not just a feeling. It's vagus nerve biology in action. A simple tool to apply is what's called the physiological sigh, studied by Dr. Jack Feldman at UCLA and highlighted by Dr. Andrew Huberman. It's a double inhale followed by a long exhale. Just 2 or 3 rounds of this lowers stress and activates the vagus nerve. Doing this before a therapy session, or even before a meeting or workout, can put your brain in the ideal state for plasticity. So here's the takeaway. The vagus nerve isn't just about calming down. It's the master switch that tells your brain when to grow, adapt, and rewire. And when recovering from something as disruptive as a stroke, flipping that switch can mean the difference between small, incremental gains and profound, life-changing progress. Here's a surprising fact. Stimulating the vagus nerve by itself doesn't do very much for recovery. You could run mild electrical pulses through it for hours, and the brain wouldn't suddenly restore speech, movement, or memory. And this is where the science gets fascinating. When you pair that stimulation with a specific action, like practicing a hand movement or repeating a word, the brain locks in that action much more strongly. Why? Because the brain is an energy miser. It doesn't want to rewire everything at once. Instead, it strengthens connections that seem important, based on timing and repetition. Vagus nerve stimulation, or VNS, acts like a spotlight. It tells the brain, this action matters. Save it. Build it. Think of it like highlighting a passage in a book. If you read the entire chapter without marking anything, you'll probably forget most of it. But if you underline one key sentence right as you read it, your brain treats it as significant. VNS does the underlining. Here's what the research shows. In 2021, The Lancet published a landmark randomized controlled trial with stroke survivors. Participants were divided into 2 groups. One did intensive physical therapy with vagus nerve stimulation, the other did therapy alone. The results were clear. Those who received VNS paired with therapy had roughly 2 to 3 times greater functional improvement in arm and hand movement. Same exercises, same duration, but when paired with VNS, the brain learned far more efficiently. Neuroscientists explain this using the concept of Hebbian plasticity, the idea that neurons that fire together wire together. When a stroke survivor tries to move their hand, the correct brain circuits may only weakly activate. By pairing that weak signal with a burst of neuromodulators released through VNS, those circuits suddenly get reinforced. It's like adding cement to bricks that were previously just stacked loosely. Let me make this practical. Imagine you're recovering from a stroke and practicing gripping a cup. Without VNS, you might need hundreds of repetitions before the brain strengthens that pathway. With VNS, you may achieve the same rewiring with far fewer repetitions because each attempt is stamped as important. That's the multiplier effect. Now, here's the broader insight. Pairing matters not just in stroke rehab, but in everyday learning. Want to remember a new language word, refine your golf swing, or pick up piano again in your 60s? Pairing the action with vagal activation, even something as simple as slow breathing before the practice, primes your brain to retain more. A simple tool to apply here is to consciously engage the vagus nerve before or during learning. For instance, do 2 minutes of slow, extended exhalations before practicing speech therapy drills. If you're learning a new motor skill, take a short break to do the physiological sigh before repeating the movement. For caregivers helping loved ones, you can coach them through a calm breathing exercise before each practice block. It may sound simple, but this shift in when the vagus nerve is activated changes how much the brain retains. And here's a motivational angle. Progress fuels persistence. One of the biggest challenges stroke survivors face is frustration when gains feel minimal. By using VNS or vagus activating practices in sync with rehab, the brain produces faster results, which fuels motivation to keep going. It creates an upward spiral. Better learning leads to more effort, which leads to even greater recovery. Before we move on, I'll pause here and say, if you're finding these insights valuable, consider subscribing to this channel. Each week, we break down neuroscience and psychology into tools you can apply for a sharper mind, stronger body, and healthier life. And your engagement helps us keep bringing this science to more people. So, here's the big takeaway. Stimulation, by itself, isn't the secret. It's stimulation paired with action that doubles or even triples recovery. The brain doesn't just need electricity, it needs relevance. And vagus nerve stimulation, timed with meaningful effort, provides exactly that. If you've ever wondered why some learning experiences stick instantly while others fade, the answer often lies in brain chemistry. And when it comes to vagus nerve stimulation, the real magic isn't in the electricity itself. It's in the chemical cocktail the stimulation unleashes in the brain. Here's what the research shows. When the vagus nerve is activated, signals travel upward into the brainstem, particularly into regions like the locus coeruleus and the basal forebrain. These areas act as chemical command centers. Once triggered, they flood the brain with neuromodulators, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Together, these are the brain's plasticity amplifiers. Let's break them down. Acetylcholine sharpens attention. Think of it like a camera lens bringing an image into focus. Without it, everything is blurry and your brain doesn't know what to prioritize. With it, circuits are tuned to the specific task at hand. Norepinephrine increases alertness and readiness to learn. It's like flipping the brain's record button, saying, "This moment matters. Capture it." Dopamine provides motivation and reinforcement. When you succeed, even in small ways, dopamine stamps the experience as rewarding, making you want to repeat it. Now, here's why this matters for stroke recovery. A stroke damages certain pathways, but other, still healthy regions can sometimes take over. For that to happen, those alternative circuits need to be strengthened. Vagus nerve stimulation ensures that during rehab, these chemicals are flowing at the exact time new connections are being attempted. Think of it like wet cement. If you're trying to build a new path in your garden, the cement needs to be poured while the stones are being laid, not hours later. VNS times the chemical release so that the cement of acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and dopamine is present when new neural stones are placed. A 2017 paper in Experimental Neurology demonstrated this clearly. When vagus stimulation was paired with a motor task in rodents, the release of these neuromodulators was dramatically higher than during the task alone. More importantly, the strength of the new neural connections persisted far longer. This is why recovery with VNS isn't just faster, it's also more durable. But this principle extends beyond stroke. Ask yourself, have you noticed how learning sticks better when you're excited, alert, and focused? That's the neuromodulator effect in daily life. You remember the thrilling conversation but forget the dull lecture. You recall a skill practiced with energy but struggle with one done in boredom. So how can you apply this if you don't have access to clinical VNS? While medical stimulation produces the strongest effect, you can mimic parts of this chemistry shift naturally. Cold exposure, like a 30 to 60 second cold shower finish, spikes norepinephrine, creating a heightened state for learning. Breathing. Techniques that emphasize long exhales increase vagal tone and acetylcholine release. Small wins, breaking tasks into achievable steps, leverage dopamine to reinforce progress. For example, if you're relearning to write after a stroke, start with one simple letter, celebrate it, and repeat. Each success releases dopamine, which chains into larger achievements. This is also why it's important to practice in short, focused sessions. Neuroscience consistently shows that 30 to 90 seconds of highly engaged repetition, followed by rest, builds stronger circuits than mindless extended practice. The chemicals work in bursts, not drips. And here's a motivational angle. Understanding the chemistry makes recovery less mysterious. Progress isn't just luck or age-dependent, it's biology. If the right neuromodulators are present, the brain can rewire at any stage of life. That truth alone is deeply empowering. So the key insight here is this. Vagus nerve stimulation is powerful because it primes the brain's chemistry. It doesn't directly move your arm or restore your words. It creates the optimal chemical storm that allows you to do the work more effectively. Whenever people hear about vagus nerve stimulation, one of the first questions is, do I need surgery for this? The answer is, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Let's unpack the difference, because this distinction matters not only for stroke survivors, but also for anyone curious about how the technology is evolving. The first major approach to vagus stimulation was invasive VNS. This involves a small surgical procedure where a device, similar to a pacemaker, is implanted under the skin of the chest. A thin wire connects it to the vagus nerve in the neck. The device delivers carefully timed electrical pulses, often paired with rehabilitation exercises. This approach has been studied for decades. In fact, the FDA approved invasive VNS years ago for treating epilepsy and treatment-resistant depression. More recently, clinical trials like the 2021 Lancet study demonstrated its effectiveness in stroke recovery. The evidence is strong. Invasive VNS, when paired with therapy, significantly improves motor recovery. But there are drawbacks. Surgery always carries risks: infection, voice changes, even temporary swallowing issues. And not everyone is eligible. For many stroke survivors, cost and access become barriers. That's where non-invasive VNS enters the picture. Non-invasive devices, sometimes called transcutaneous VNS, TVNS, Stimulate the vagus nerve through the skin, most often at the ear, where a branch of the nerve is accessible. Imagine a small, handheld device, almost like earbuds or a clip, delivering gentle pulses externally. No surgery, no implant, just a device you can place and remove. Here's what the research shows so far. Pilot studies, including a 2019 paper in brain stimulation, suggest that TVNS produces measurable changes in brain activity similar to invasive VNS. It activates the same brainstem pathways and releases the same neuromodulators, though the effects may be slightly weaker. Early trials pairing TVNS with rehab exercises show promising improvements in motor and speech recovery. The advantage here is accessibility. Non-invasive devices can be distributed more widely, are safer, and don't require surgery. The challenge is consistency, because stimulation through the skin doesn't always reach the nerve as reliably as direct implants. So, should you wait for non-invasive devices to mature, or consider an implant if you're eligible? The answer depends on your goals, your medical team's guidance, and your risk tolerance. What's exciting is that the field is moving quickly. Just like hearing aids or wearable glucose monitors, what once required invasive procedures may soon be done comfortably at home. Now, let's zoom out. Even if you don't have access to these medical devices, there's a larger principle here. The body has multiple entry points for vagus stimulation. External devices are one pathway, but so are everyday practices like breathing, cold water exposure, or even sound frequencies that target vagal branches. In fact, many researchers are now exploring multimodal vagus stimulation, combining simple daily practices with medical-grade devices to maximize outcomes. Let me pause here and ask you, does the idea of using a device to stimulate your vagus nerve feel empowering or intimidating? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And you'll probably find others in this community asking the very same questions, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing. This channel is all about making complex neuroscience usable. Whether you're navigating recovery, supporting someone you love, or simply looking to build a sharper, healthier brain for the decades ahead. Your engagement helps grow a community where science becomes practice. So here's the key takeaway. Invasive and non-invasive VNS are both scientifically valid. Invasive implants remain the gold standard for stroke rehabilitation, but non-invasive methods are catching up fast. And while devices are evolving, you already hold powerful tools in your breath, your habits, and your daily routines to tap into the very same nerve. Here's something empowering. You don't need a surgical implant or a medical device to tap into the vagus nerve. Every day you carry built-in tools that influence it directly, through your breath, your environment, and even sound. While these methods aren't a substitute for clinical vagus nerve stimulation in stroke recovery, they can powerfully complement rehabilitation and support overall brain health. Let's start with breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing, especially when you extend the exhale, is one of the fastest ways to activate the vagus nerve. Why? Because the vagus nerve tightly regulates heart rate variability, which is the rhythm of acceleration and deceleration between each beat. Long exhales increase vagal activity, lowering stress signals and opening the brain to plasticity. A study, published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience in 2018, found that slow-paced breathing enhanced parasympathetic activity and improved emotional regulation. For stroke survivors, this state is crucial. Stress hinders neuroplasticity, while calm enhances it. Here's a simple tool. Try the 4-26 breath. Inhale through your nose for a count of 4, then exhale through your mouth for a count of 6. Just 2 minutes of this before therapy or practice can prime your brain for learning. Next, cold exposure. Cold may sound uncomfortable, but physiologically, it's a powerful stimulator of the vagus nerve. Immersing the face in cold water or ending a shower with 30 seconds of cold activates a reflex called the mammalian dive response. This reflex triggers vagal activity, slowing the heart rate and enhancing parasympathetic tone. A 2019 review in Neurobiology of Stress highlighted how cold exposure increases norepinephrine release, creating both calm and alertness. For recovery, that means entering a state where the brain is primed for focused effort. Practical application. You don't need an ice bath. Simply splash cold water on your face before therapy, or finish your shower with a short burst of cold. Think of it as a natural switch, flipping the brain into a learning-ready mode. And then there's sound. Certain frequencies of sound stimulate the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, located in the ear. Researchers have explored low-frequency, vibrations, and even chanting practices like Om as vagal activators. A 2010 study in Medical Hypotheses suggested that the extended exhalation during chanting not only engages the breath, but also vibrates the vocal cords in a way that stimulates vagal pathways. One practical tool: humming. Just spend a few minutes humming slowly, focusing on the vibration in your throat and chest. It may sound simple, but the mechanical vibration engages vagal fibers, while the extended exhale provides the parasympathetic activation. Now, why are these tools so important? Beyond stroke recovery? Because they can be practiced daily by anyone, at any age, to enhance stress resilience, emotional regulation, and focus. Remember, the vagus nerve doesn't only influence recovery, it's the main highway connecting your brain to your body. Keeping it flexible and responsive is like maintaining the wiring of your house. It ensures all the systems function more smoothly. Here's a motivational thought. Every breath, every shower, every sound you make is an opportunity to signal your brain, I am safe, I am focused, I am ready to grow. That's not just mindfulness talk, it's hardwired biology. So the takeaway here is this. Everyday practices may not replace medical devices, but they provide free, accessible, and effective ways to keep your vagus nerve active. When paired with recovery or learning, they create the fertile soil that allows neuroplasticity to flourish. Here's a question to consider. What if the same mechanisms that help stroke survivors rebuild lost abilities could also enhance your brain every single day, regardless of age? That's exactly what neuroscience tells us about the vagus nerve. Earlier, we explored how VNS primes the brain for learning by releasing key chemicals and strengthening circuits. But this principle isn't limited to stroke recovery. The vagus nerve is a master regulator of stress, attention, and inflammation, all of which shape your long-term brain health. Engaging it strategically can enhance focus, emotional control, and resilience in everyday life. Let's look at the science. Chronic stress and high sympathetic activity, that fight or flight mode, impair neuroplasticity. Brain circuits weaken, memory formation falters, and emotional regulation suffers. Conversely, activating the vagus nerve increases parasympathetic tone, lowers inflammation, and supports neuroplasticity. A 2016 study in Nature Reviews Neuroscience highlighted how vagal stimulation can improve cognitive flexibility and attention, the very skills critical for learning, productivity, and decision-making across the lifespan. Here's an analogy. Think of your brain as a dense forest. Stress and inflammation are wildfires, burning pathways and slowing growth. The vagus nerve is the river running through the forest, nourishing new saplings and clearing smoke. Activate it regularly, and you create an environment where new neural pathways grow more easily. So, how can you apply this for lifelong brain resilience? First, incorporate daily vagus nerve practices. Slow, deliberate breathing with extended exhales. Brief, cold exposures or face immersions. vocal exercises like humming or chanting. Second, pair stimulation with meaningful action. Whether learning a skill, practicing mindfulness, or doing physical exercise, engaging the vagus nerve at the same time amplifies the effect. The combination of chemical priming and behavioral reinforcement is what accelerates growth. Third, optimize. Lifestyle factors. Adequate sleep, regular movement, and social engagement all increase baseline vagal tone. Studies in psychosomatic medicine show that people with higher vagal tone have lower inflammation, better cardiovascular health, and more emotional resilience. In other words, the same mechanisms that help rebuild after a stroke also protect your brain decades later. Here's a simple protocol to integrate into daily life. Start your day with 2 minutes of deep, paced breathing. During midday breaks, do a brief cold splash or a humming exercise. Pair evening learning or skill practice with the same breathing technique. Over time, this consistent practice keeps your neural pathways adaptable, reduces stress, and enhances focus, essentially training your brain to be resilient before adversity strikes. Let's take a moment for perspective. Neuroplasticity isn't just for recovery, it's for growth. You don't need to wait for a crisis like a stroke to activate these systems. By understanding and leveraging the vagus nerve, you're giving yourself a tool to maintain peak cognitive and emotional performance for the rest of your life. Here's a challenge. Pick one vagus nerve practice today. Maybe the physiological sigh, a cold splash, or 2 minutes of humming, and pair it with an action you care about. Notice how your focus and engagement change. Share your experience in the comments. The community is learning together. Remember, the science is clear. The vagus nerve is a bridge between the brain, body, and environment. Activating it strategically rewires your brain for recovery, resilience, and performance. And while the research is thrilling, the real power is in your daily choices. Small, intentional actions that compound over time. By making vagus nerve activation part of your life, you're not just building recovery skills, you're cultivating a brain that is flexible, focused, and resilient, ready to adapt to any challenge that comes your way. We've traveled through some remarkable neuroscience today, from the vagus nerve as a master switch for neuroplasticity, to the chemical signals that fuel learning, to practical, everyday tools you can use at home. The story is clear. The brain is not fixed. It is adaptable, responsive, and capable of extraordinary recovery when given the right signals. Let's recap the key insights. First, the vagus nerve primes the brain for growth. It isn't just about slowing your heart rate or aiding digestion. It's a master regulator, opening the door for new neural connections. Second, timing is everything. Pairing stimulation with meaningful action dramatically accelerates recovery and learning. Third, the chemicals released during VNS, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and dopamine, act as fertilizers for your neurons, making the pathways you're trying to strengthen far more durable. Fourth, we explored the clinical landscape. Invasive implants remain the gold standard for stroke rehabilitation, but non-invasive devices are catching up, offering accessibility and safety. Fifth, you don't need a device to benefit. Breathing exercises, cold exposure, and sound can all stimulate the vagus nerve, enhancing focus, emotional regulation, and neuroplasticity. Sixth, these tools aren't just for stroke recovery. They can be applied every day to strengthen brain resilience, sharpen attention, and reduce stress, no matter your age or current health status. Here's the underlying message. Recovery and growth aren't left to chance. Your nervous system responds to the right cues, your habits can amplify neuroplasticity, and even small consistent practices compound into profound change. The physiological sigh you practice before a learning session, the brief cold splash at midday, the humming exercise before a skill drill, each is a small signal telling your brain, pay attention. Build this connection. Now, let's bring this home with a personal reflection. I often think about how science gives us leverage over our biology. Not in a magical way, but in a precise, evidence-backed way. The tools we've explored today are accessible, safe, and practical. They remind us that the body and brain are partners in growth, recovery, and resilience. Here's a challenge I want you to try immediately. Pick one vagus nerve tool, slow breathing, a cold splash, or humming, and pair it with a simple action today. Maybe it's a hand exercise, a short learning task, or even journaling your thoughts. Notice the difference in focus, calm, and clarity, and then commit to doing it daily for the next week. Finally, I invite you to join this community of curious minds. Like this video if you found these insights valuable. Comment below with your experiences or questions. Your story might help someone else accelerate their own recovery or growth. And subscribe to stay connected, because every week we dive into science-backed tools for brain, body, and life optimization. The vagus nerve is more than a pathway. It's a bridge between science and application, between recovery and resilience, between who you are today and who you can become tomorrow. By applying these practices, you're not just rewiring circuits. You're cultivating a life where your brain, body, and habits work together at their fullest potential. Remember, the science is on your side, the tools are in your hands, and every small action compounds into meaningful, lasting change. Start today. Your brain will thank you tomorrow.